Which Conlang should be the international auxiliary language? That was a question that was posted on Duolingo, and then after a long discussion, I finally was talked into weighing in on what my opinion was on that question, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Hi, my name's Tommaso, and this is the Esperanto Variety Show. This is a channel that's about Esperanto. There's content in Esperanto about Esperanto. I've been speaking Esperanto actively for 20 years, and 10 of those years I was involved with a mailing list called Conlang and spent a lot of time talking to people about different aspects of this idea of inventing a language to be used as a universal language and different solutions to that problem. Ultimately, I decided that it was a big rabbit hole, that it's just, while there's lots of interesting things to do with constructed languages, trying to get a brand new constructed language out there in the world that everyone's going to say, hey, this is such a wonderful language, let's all learn it, that's not going to happen. And you can just keep on going down levels and levels and levels of insanity, quite honestly. Anyway, that's what we're going to talk about today. Another thing I want to say is that I don't have a problem with people learning Conlang projects because of their own sense of aesthetic value or the value they find in that project. Esperanto is the only language project that has a large community of people speaking it, but there are people you can speak with in these other languages, and it can be a lot of fun. I've spent a fair amount of time speaking interlingua with people online. I've had fun with Edo, and I have some books in Edo, and I've played around with some other languages, other language projects, and had some fun with that. The question was posted by somebody named Zassybean. He says that he thinks Esperanto would be the best contender. Regular viewers of this channel will know what Esperanto is. Esperanto is an invented language. It was invented 130 years ago, and it was designed to be a universal second language, an auxiliary language in that sense. A language that helps people communicate with each other. They're not going to replace their main language, but it's going to be a helping language. Before I get too deep into this, I do want to point out that from my point of view, the value in Esperanto is not necessarily, in fact, not even necessarily, it's not in this dream of being a universal language someday. It's in the use that we have for Esperanto today, as you and I speak. The fact that you can learn Esperanto now and make friends around the world, that you can use it to communicate with people on the same level, right? Rather than trying to speak as a foreign speaker to a native speaker, trying to speak uphill. You can be more or less equal in terms of both coming to this language fresh, and it also allows you to become more fluent. That's been my experience. You can attain a higher level of fluency as a second language learner in Esperanto. That is the value of Esperanto. Alright, so when Zassybean asked this question, one of the things he did kind of say is he says he's hoping people will not just say, oh, Esperanto, of course, that's going to be the best choice. You'd expect Esperanto speakers to say that on a board dedicated to Esperanto. And there were lots of input, and I tried very hard not to answer the question because I don't think there is an answer to this question. Let's consider the vocabulary, for example. One of the complaints that comes up again and again about Esperanto as far as being a universal language is, well, what about people that don't speak European languages? Is it fair to make them learn all these root words that are familiar to us as English speakers or French speakers or German speakers or Russian speakers, but would not be familiar to somebody who speaks Swahili or Japanese or Mandarin or that sort of thing? It's a legitimate question. Ultimately, I personally think there is no solution to that problem. There are 6,000 languages in the world. If we were to take one word from each one of those languages, we'd have a vocabulary of 6,000 words. And I can't imagine that some speaker of Farsi, Sard, pick a language, is going to go learn this language and say, oh, that language has one word from my language. That's so much easier now, right? There's no solution to this. Either it's going to be easy to one group of people, or it's going to be, the vocabulary is going to be universally difficult. And I had an idea that I thought would be fun, and that would be, this was actually before Google Translate. If we had come up with a language like Esperanto, whatever, in what way like Esperanto or not like Esperanto, in this hypothetical idea we would come up with 3 zones, vocabulary zones, and then within those groups we would come up with different vocabulary items. By the way, in my discussion on the Duolingo forum, lots of people misunderstood my idea, so I'm going to try to explain it a little more carefully this time. So what we do is we come up with zones, all right? So details are up for discussion, but you could say like there's an African zone, a European zone, and an Asian zone. And then within those zones, then we come up with vocabulary that would be familiar to people from those areas. So for example, the European word for bird could be, let's just say birdo, B-I-R-D-O, just happens to be the same as the Esperanto word for bird. And then we could have the Asian word for bird could be torio. And then the third word could be, just, I think I picked this from Swahili, I don't remember at this point, ndego, N-D-E-G-O, ndego. Right, so birdo, torio, and ndego, right? And we would declare that these 3 words mean exactly the same thing. The grammar of the 3 languages would be the same, the word order would be exactly the same, the endings, everything, the meanings of these 3 words that are linked together. And what we would do is we would then have a computer go through and essentially change the vocabulary of the language. So I could write something in a European version of this language and then have it copied. And I avoided using the word translate. I came up with the word translexify. Right? So you literally replace each word, do a word for word or a lexeme by lexeme translation by computer. And Zazie Bean came up with some of his own criteria. He said there should be no contradictory rules, it should be consistent, the design should be innovative, you should be able to say whatever you want, the language should be simplicity and simple and easy to learn, and it should be an aesthetically pleasant language. He and I actually went back and forth. Again, if you're interested in the whole discussion, it's all out there. And I was trying to get him to sort of specify what he meant by these various details. Since it made sense to him, he thought it would make sense to me. The problem with that approach is ultimately, when it comes to this idea, these words all mean different things to different people, and that's why you find people that get really into all these different details, and certain things are important to them, so it's important from the beginning to know what we're talking about. But in any event, here we go. So after a long back and forth with Zazie Bean, he finally asked me, please, may you suggest a conlang and a justification? So I decided I would go ahead and I would answer that question as best I could, because he asked so nicely. And after discussing the answer, we said, well, you know what, let's do a video on that as well. The way I put it in my post was, the best international auxiliary language is the one that people are actually going to speak. And whatever that means, we'll see, right? I think Esperanto has shown that people are willing to speak it. Someone named The Real Maestro, he spoke about Esperanto's 2 main advantages. These 2 advantages are standardization and inertia. By standardization, we mean that you can learn Esperanto and then come back 5 years, 10 years later, and still expect Esperanto to be the same as it was when you learned it before. If you learned French in high school, you can go out when you're 50 years old or whatever and still speak French with people, assuming you remember how to speak it, right? Some other projects, some other invented languages, people always like to tinker with them, and that's why I call this a rabbit hole. People can't even agree on what the criteria are, let alone how to apply them, and people who've come up with a project, they can't let it go. They can't stop tinkering with it. I'd gotten interested in a language project called Intal. I found a description of the language, and from that description of the language I started writing texts in that language, and some years later I discovered that somebody had found some more material and put it online, and it was for a different revision of the language. So, you know, you've got 4 people in the world that speak Intal, and all 4 of them speak a different version of Intal. So that's not standardization. On the other hand, we talk about inertia. Inertia is this idea that people have started learning it, right? There are people who speak Esperanto. There are people who speak Edo too. There are people who speak Interlingua. There are people who speak High Valerian, right? But we're talking about hundreds of people, thousands of people, not tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of people. So Esperanto has, of these speech communities, it has the most inertia. Between the fact that it has standardization and an inertia, it gives it its most value. So that's one answer to the question. I think Esperanto will be the best contender in this sense for this hypothetical international language, which may or may not impact, well, probably will never come as far as I'm concerned, and does not impact Esperanto's value. Esperanto is, in a lot of ways, the best contender, at least for showing this idea that such a language is possible. And what I mean by that is there really is no sense of best or perfect, right? This idea of finding the perfect solution to this problem is really the rabbit hole. Speaking of standardization and inertia, Intal has no inertia, right? But it has some interesting solutions to the problem that it had no inertia. The coolest thing about Intal is that you don't need an Intal dictionary to write it. You can write it using whichever dictionary you have on hand. For most of the world, this will be an Esperanto dictionary, but it really doesn't matter. I think this demonstrates that the whole question is silly. That is, the whole question of vocabulary and which language is better. It's kind of a silly question. If you can come up with a project like Intal, and what's cool to me about Intal is that it had a series of vocabulary transformations, basically saying, this sound should be spelled this way and pronounced. These sounds from Esperanto should be pronounced this way. These sounds from Interlingua should be spelled this way. These sounds from Occidental should be spelled this way and pronounced as they're spelled. And so if you follow those rules, no matter which word you pick, it almost always is the same in Intal. There are some fine differences. That would be another video all about Intal. But anyway, the point is, it doesn't matter which dictionary you pick, your end result is going to be more or less the same. So that was kind of neat. The fact that Intal didn't have its own dictionary was an interesting solution to the problem of inertia. So you could pick whichever dictionary you wanted. You didn't need to wait for the fact that you didn't need to wait for people to publish a big Intal dictionary. The problem was Intal had no standardization. And if I ever get into it again, should I learn the same version that I learned before, or should I learn one of the other versions that's out there? Who knows? And then I also talked about the machine translexified language. I think that's kind of a cool idea that I'm surprised fewer people speak about. And maybe, in 30 years, machine translation will be so much better to the point that my idea is a silly idea. Time will tell. But this is what I wrote in my post. So, in summary, as much as I can make sense of your original question, I think I've already answered that Esperanto is the best choice because of standardization and inertia. That is, Esperanto has the fundamento and it has 130 years of history. If you learn Esperanto, it will be the same language in 10 years. So you have some confidence that the effort you're putting into learning it count. And you'll be able to redeem that later in your life. I also like the idea of a zonal translexifiable language. That's the best choice because there's no other solution to the vocabulary problem. Intal is the best choice because it demonstrates that it's not all about the dictionary and that differences don't matter. So what do you think? Do you think that Esperanto's value is in some future dream of some fina venko, where it can be the universal language? Do you think its value is in what we do with it now? Do you have interest in Occidental or Latino sin flexione or Edo or these other languages? And what do you do with them? Do you like these languages because you want them to be the universal language, or because you find something appealing in them now or in the communities of people who speak them? I'd like to hear what you have to say about that. If you have any questions about what I had said about all this, I'll be glad to try to clarify it. I have a link to the original thread so you can see some more detail about all that. And don't forget this video right here. It's another good one. Hope you like to learn more about Esperanto, more about international languages, constructed languages. So check out this one right here. And also, that's about it.